All righty, here we go. Chapter 17, Section 2, Biological Hazards. Now, talk about hazards, etc., risks. Well, the greatest risk is death, if you will. But within the human race, really the most serious biological hazards that we face are infectious diseases. Things like the flu, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, tuberculosis, diarrheal diseases, many things that cause people to get diarrhea, but those in general, along with malaria, just to name a few, and we'll kind of highlight some along the way. Now, for an infectious disease, some sort of pathogen invades the body and then it multiplies, like a virus. You inhale a virus in, typically there are other ways you can get it. It gets in, it goes into your cell, it multiplies, breaks open, releases from the cell, goes out to others. Or you ingest bacteria of some shape, form, or fashion, and the same thing. The bacteria gets in your body, 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, multiplies, parasites, etc. It's multiplying, and then it causes the problems. In the case of a virus, it's destroying your actual cells. Sometimes in the case of like a protozoan or a bacteria, sometimes it can be the bacteria itself, or it can be the waste like from protozoa, which can make you sick, but all kinds of things. And then we talk about transmissible diseases. These are ones that are going to be contagious, right? Or communicable. Tend to be worse because they can spread so quickly. Because infectious diseases then are transmitted between people. We know with a virus, somebody coughs or sneezes, the virus goes in the air, and then somebody else breathes it in. So it's communicable from one person to the other. Just like the common cold, the coronavirus, tuberculosis, gonorrhea. Now, sometimes it's communicable by we can breathe, other times it's communicable by bodily fluids. So typically things like AIDS, HIV, or STDs. Once again, they are infectious diseases, but they're spread through bodily fluid. But as is a cold, bodily fluids from sneeze, but sometimes it takes other types of fluids, the blood primarily. We also have non-transmissible diseases. These are not caused by living organisms. Examples of this like cardiovascular disease, heart attack. A lot of times that's caused from dietary or eating, and your arteries get clogged, you can't get enough blood into the heart. But anyway, it's still a disease. Most cancers are not transmittable. You can't give cancer to somebody else. Asthma, it's a respiratory illness, if you will, but it's non-communicable. And like diabetes, your body's lack of being able to produce insulin. So we have diseases that are not transmissible, but in infectious disease, these are our biggest ones. Now, we also use a couple of terms. We have epidemic and then like pandemic. Epidemic, this is when there's a large-scale outbreak. We say, oh my goodness, it's an epidemic, because in this area, lots of people are getting the disease, the sickness, if you will. It becomes a pandemic when it's a global epidemic. So a lot of times, especially when diseases spread really fast, like Ebola is one of those, it really doesn't have a chance to get out of an area and it can stay contained. But of course, in the case with the coronavirus, it spread very quickly and it was all around the planet, so it became a pandemic. Epidemic regionally, pandemic global. Let's take a look at some of the most common, if you will. And here's kind of a quick little bar graph of deaths per year. Anytime we talk about risk, death is the biggest risk. Now, lower respiratory infections. These are things typically like your cold, but really more like the flu. About 2.4 million deaths per year. Typically caused from bacteria and viruses, but it's a whole host. And a lot of times it's not the flu that's killing, but the flu allows you to then get pneumonia, which winds up being the primary killer. Then we have tuberculosis. This is also from a bacteria, gets in, causes growth within the lung. HIV or AIDS, these are both from a virus and through bodily fluids. 940, almost 1 million people a year, just under. Hepatitis B, this is viral again, about 780 down to about 3/4 of a million. Then the diarrheal diseases. Normally this is bacterias and viruses tend to cause people to get diarrhea. Once again, about 760, still in this 3/4 of a million deaths a year from diarrheal type things. Once again, if you're already a little weak, a little dehydrated, vomiting and diarrhea can pretty much do it in for you. Malaria, about 500,000 people a year. Now, malaria is a protozoa, single-celled organism that's in the blood and gets transferred by the mosquito. And then measles, which is a virus, down to about 91,000 people a year. Now, infectious disease was a leading cause of death in the world in 1900. The incidence of infectious disease has dropped significantly since then. It's still a problem, especially in less developed countries. Once again, bad water a lot of times. They're getting a lot of the either virus or bacteria from the bad water, so in less developed countries it still is a big issue. Many disease-carrying bacteria have also developed genetic immunity due to widely used antibiotics. We use antibiotics to kill. Once again, with a virus, you can't use antibiotics, but with bacteria, you can. But unfortunately, we've had a lot of genetic resistance, and that is the science focus. Science Focus 17.1 is specifically on this, genetic resistance to antibiotics and antifungals. And you probably want to read that to get a little more depth, but I'll run through it quickly. In general, antibiotics is just a chemical that is designed specifically to kill bacteria. Well, it's becoming less and less effective against many bacteria because antibiotic resistance. Bacteria divide and multiply quickly, so they evolve quickly. If one is not killed by the antibiotic, well, then it exists, and then it multiplies 1 into 2, 2 into 4, because they're virtually clones of each other. So any mutation that occurs in a bacteria that allows it to survive, it passes on that genetic material. Antibiotics use has been incredibly widespread, and also especially in things like livestock, we're putting it in the food. And we've just developed a lot of superbugs, if you will. And these things are resistant only but a handful of antibiotics. So it's just getting harder and harder to kill them because they have developed resistance to what we have. A case study on tuberculosis. Now, it's a global threat around the world. Tuberculosis, also known as TB, a lot of times you'll get a skin test for it, they prick to see if it comes up. This is a highly contagious bacterial infection of the lungs, and it has been seriously spreading throughout the world since 1990. Why is it on the rise? Well, there's a lack of screening and control programs in a lot of places. Sometimes when you go to school or before you go into college, you have to get a TB test. But a lot of places, most places of work aren't screening for it. Somebody comes in with tuberculosis, and this is an infectious disease. It can spread. It has genetic resistance, unfortunately, to the majority of effective antibiotics at this point. Spread, a lot of use of antibiotics, and resistance has occurred. And just person-to-person contact has increased. A lot more people on the planet, density dependent. The more people on the planet, the more contact we have, the easier it is for disease to spread. Picture back here is of an x-ray of somebody with tuberculosis. It's bacterial, but it winds up causing some growth and problems in the lungs, and you get where you can't really breathe properly. This is where literally it damages the lungs. People cough up blood in later stages of it, but really can be pretty bad. But it is on the rise. Then just viral diseases and parasites. The flu, right? Influenza, the flu, common cold, if you will. The flu itself kills the most people worldwide. Once again, not so much the flu specifically, but the flu comes in and then your body is susceptible to getting pneumonia or other things. Once again, if you're already weak and you're vomiting with diarrhea, it's enough to throw people over the edge and they die. Not to mention pneumonia can just be very deadly. Then the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. This affects about 2 million people yearly. Now, HIV is spread through bodily contact, mainly sex as bodily fluids. It can be by a needle, infectious needle, if people are sharing needles. Sex is one of the most common. Once again, 2 million people a year dying from it. Then there's hepatitis B virus, and this affects the liver. You can have cirrhosis of the liver, Ebola, the West Nile virus, and Zika. Once again, these are viruses, viral. As they come in, they go into a cell, inject their RNA or a strand of DNA into the cell, causes the cell to replicate more of the virus, and then it lyses the cell, breaks the cell open, and those viruses go out, land on other cells, and do it again. Viruses can spread very rapidly just because of the way that they multiply within the body. Now, we also get viruses that move from animals to humans. And actually, good hygiene can reduce the chances of infection. Washing your hands a lot, well, not a lot, but when you do something with your hands, wash and get clean from it. Not sharing razors or towels with others, because little cuts, you're sharing blood innocent, the virus can transfer much easier. You want to cover cuts and scrapes until they heal. Once again, you're exposing your bodily fluids. Avoid contact with people that actually have viral disease. If somebody actually has a virus, this is why we quarantine, to get people until they're healed from it. And keeping away from touching your eyes, toes, and throats, right? Or if you get the virus on your fingers and you put it in your hands and your mouth and your throat, much more likely to catch it and get it. Now, another case study is on HIV or the AIDS epidemic. Again, epidemic's been more regional. Of course, it has traveled the globe. Now, AIDS is caused by HIV. This leaves the body very vulnerable to infections. It attacks the immune system, autoimmune deficiency syndrome. It attacks our immune system, so the immune system can't protect us from other things, if you will. This is the leading cause of death for people between age 15 to 49 worldwide. There's no vaccine yet to prevent or to cure AIDS. We do have some very costly drugs that can slow the viral progression. So we can kind of treat the symptoms, if you will. We can keep the virus from progressing, but once again, the drugs for that really are quite costly. So Science Focus 17.2, ecological medicine. Now, over half of all the diseases that are out there originated in either wild or domesticated animal species. HIV, for instance, came from primates, like apes, if you will, chimpanzee, and once again crossed to humans. Lyme disease crossed from deer and mice, and then through the tick, and deer come to the tick bites a human, and it comes to the human. Avian flu, avian bird flu, if you will, started in birds, crossed, came to humans. Plague came from the rats carried the plague, and then the fleas transferred the plague to humans. Dengue fever came from apes, once again. Apes, mosquito bites the ape, the mosquito bit human, and it jumped from apes to humans. And the African sleeping sickness comes from tsetse flies. And once again, there's a lot of these that come from either wild or even domesticated. Swine flu came from pigs. Once again, lots and lots of examples of it. Now, ecological medicine studies how human practices have actually encouraged the spread of these particular diseases. It's just when we interact with them, we're around the animals more, we kind of see this happening. The picture back here is just of Lyme disease. Once again, it's something that normally affected deer, but then ticks can spread it into humans. And the rash there on the person is just what it winds up looking like when you get bit by a tick and Lyme disease gets transferred to you. Can be treated, but Lyme disease can be particularly rough if you don't catch it. You always kind of want to make a note of if you get bit by a tick, if you start getting flu-like symptoms within 1 month, you need to make sure that you don't have Lyme disease. And we want to look at malaria as a case study. Now, this is the spread of a parasite. It is caused by a protozoa, single-celled organism. Now, a particular mosquito picks up the parasite. So the parasite is in the blood, it's infecting the blood. Once again, parasite, host, right? And it's taking its nutrients from the blood cells. The mosquito, a particular one, picks it up, carries it from one infected person and transfers it to another. Tends to happen in tropical and subtropical regions, so below the 30th latitude. And it's spread, the uninfected mosquito bites an infected person. So you just, your mosquito's cruising around, it lands on me, bites me. If I have malaria, it picks up the protozoan, and then it flies over, lands on you, and transfers the protozoan into the infected person. With climate change, we're particularly concerned about malaria spreading. It's been in certain areas, but as it warms up and it gets a little warmer here, the mosquitoes can now survive in climates they didn't used to be able to survive in, and people who have not been subject to malaria are now becoming in contact with the mosquitoes because of climate change, it getting warmer, and then moving into what used to be temperate areas. So malaria since 1970 has been increasing, and we see it moving a little farther north than it has. It's becoming drug resistant. It's a plasma, the parasite is a plasmodium, but we also have the insecticide resistant mosquitoes, and the plasmodium itself is becoming drug resistant. So we get a drug resistant plasmodium, and we're also getting insecticide resistant mosquitoes, and it's just making the problem worse. There's still currently no effective vaccine available, and basically insecticide treating bed nets and window screens are really the best option, and these very simple, low tech, if you will, a screen over it, have saved at least 6 million lives between 2000 and 2014. But as the mosquitoes spread and the areas where malaria can be transferred spread, it's just a serious concern. If you take a look at the red up here, this is the areas where it is. About 42% of the world exists, but that red is growing, getting into larger and larger areas. And once again, it's just something that is of a specific concern as the planet warms and our climates get a little bit warmer. What do we do to reduce the incidence of infectious diseases? Now, the percentage of worldwide deaths from infectious diseases has dropped by 1/3 from 1970 to 2016. We cut it down by 1/3. A lot of this is just immunization. Once again, right now with COVID, the vaccine is being released. It's not out for everybody yet, but getting vaccinated, getting immunized against known diseases is one of the biggest problems. The average annual death rates from infectious diseases in children under 5 has been reduced from 12 million down to 5.4 million, just between 1990 and 2016. And most of this is simply because of immunizations. Get your shots when it's time to get your shots. And a lot of these, we're trying to go into areas where they know they have them and making the vaccines available. Because in a lot of areas, because of poverty, the vaccine just isn't available, and the people there can't afford to go buy one, so it needs to fall down sometimes onto developed countries to provide aid. Once again, this is where subsidies are good, right? We want to put money into what are going to absolutely save lives, and a lot of times immunizations do, well, not, but it is known that immunizations do just that. So what are some of our solutions for infectious disease, if you will? Well, we need to increase our research on a lot of the tropical diseases and work on getting vaccines. Sometimes in areas that are mainly poor, and it just hasn't had the developed world's attention to develop a vaccine. This is something we need to do. We need to improve the drinking water quality, and we need to cut down on poverty and malnutrition. These are just the big: poverty, malnutrition, bad water. Getting those things fixed, which is doable, will make a huge difference. We need to reduce the unnecessary use of antibiotics. We need to hold antibiotics when somebody's sick and we really need it, but we're using them too much and it is encouraging resistance to it. Too many organisms out there resistant to the things we've designed to try and kill them. We need to sharply reduce the use of antibiotics on livestock. We're putting it there, once again, it's density dependent. We're afraid they're going to get sick, but we're loading them up with antibiotics just to hope they don't get sick. It's not really the ideal use for it. We need to immunize children against the major viral diseases, everything that we have vaccines for. We need to make sure we have programs in place to take care of it. We need to provide oral rehydration for diarrhea victims. Once again, sometimes if you're in a place where you don't have good water and you're drinking bad water, the problem just gets over and over. But in some shape, form, or fashion, come up with ways to provide rehydration for people when they do get diarrhea, because they're dying from dehydration actually, not enough water because they can't keep it down. We really need to conduct some global campaigns to reduce HIV and AIDS. There are some things that you can definitely do to keep from getting it. Safe sex is a huge one, but we still just need a lot more work and effort on that end. Guys, that is it for our biologicals. Come back next time and we'll talk about chemical hazards.